Welcome everyone to Melfuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Adolescence Episode 1. This is a Netflix limited series. So I will start spoiler free because it is an Episode 1. This is a Patreon sponsored review, so thank you very much to Alison for picking the show. This is a British made TV show about the accusation of a 13-year-old boy of committing murder. And that probably sounds not necessarily the type of thing that I would normally cover. Not that I had a choice, it was a Patreon pick, but still, there is like one little asterisk on the whole thing, which immediately made it a lot more compelling to me the second that I found it out. And that is that each episode is presented in a single shot. Now, I'm sure that they didn't actually film the entire episode in one take. I imagine there's a lot of hidden cuts to try and stitch, admittedly, still fairly lengthy, uninterrupted chunks, but I imagine there's some trickery to make some things fit together so it appears as one shot, even if it was, really however many it might have been. I don't know, but that's the hook. At least to me, that's the hook. To me, the hook here is the filmmaking process rather than the story itself. But what does that do for the story? Well, it does this kind of like, it forces the story into real time, right? And not in like a gimmicky way like 24 would do it. It forces it to kind of go beat by beat, pace by pace, in the context of each episode. Now, I've obviously not seen the rest of the show yet. It's only 4 episodes long. So I assume there'll be a jump between 1 and 2, and 2 and 3, and so on. But episode 1 starts with a couple of the police officers just kind of biding their time, talking about personal stuff, and then it turns out they're there on this street to raid a house, to sort of do a forced entry and arrest this teenager for murder, right? And it's not until, I don't actually think the word murder said in at least for a little bit. The episode, one of the things that it does is it kind of like teases out what actually he's been accused of. We get early on, it's quite a good sense that it is murder, but the fact that it's a violent murder, the fact that it's a murder of whoever, I don't want to spoil too much. I said I'd start spoiler free. The weird thing about this though is that I feel like I can describe a lot of the episode without spoiling anything, because the way I would describe this show, at least so far, is that it's a very methodical look through the process, because it goes from the arrest, the going through the house, the reaction of the family of this, the police barging in, all that kind of thing, and it goes through each piece of what happens in the next hour, which is getting taken to the station, the idea of like getting booked, and all the other things that happen in this type of case, and obviously the fact that the suspect is only 13 adds this extra kind of layer of uncomfortable discussion. And not just for us, the audience, even the characters, like the people who work at the station, because the camera doesn't necessarily stay on like one particular character. It will happily switch and follow someone else out of a scene that it didn't start with. And it's a really smart way of like leaving some characters for a bit and coming back to them, because we just follow someone else. So anyway, that's what the show is. And specifically this first episode, it's the arrest to begin with, and then everything that happens in the hour after that. And it builds to something that feels like a conclusion. It does feel like an ending to the episode when it gets there. So, what did I think of it? It was very good. This really is all the execution, right? If you just tell me there's a show about a 13-year-old being accused of murder, and we're going to go through the process of what that entails, I wouldn't necessarily be that excited by that. It wouldn't necessarily be bad, don't get me wrong. It could be really well done in very conventional ways too. There's ways of writing that phenomenally. But here, the idea of following it in a single take and showing kind of the panic of the characters, right? These parents wondering what the hell's going on, the kids' fear of what's happening, having all that kind of play out in like those like minutes that feel like a long time, and in a bad way for the people it's happening to, but in a good way as a TV watcher, because it really feels like, oh, that 5 minutes where they really had no idea why this was happening. You can feel the frustration and the fear and the mixed emotions and like all the things that it goes through. And I think going through the process, and there's just a lot of subtle things in the dialogue about where they're kind of like questioning the kid, and it kind of like becomes almost like a double meaning by the end because of where things go and what's presented to the audience after a certain point. And it kind of tries to use the natural flow of the events to create a way to gradually reveal more information to the audience about what the crime itself is and what the severity of the crime is. I mean, admittedly, it sounds silly to say that because we're talking about murder, but like, you know, like how bad of a murder are we talking here? Is this the sort of thing where let's say he did it, right? Again, this is hypothetical, this part, just for an example. Let's say he did it. Are we talking about he got into a fight with another kid, the kid fell and hit his head, and he accidentally killed him? Or are we talking about he hunted someone down and gutted them like a fish? Two very different things, right? What one's a little bit more sympathetic than the other, one might say. So it's like, yeah, we don't really know the context of any of, and again, that's if he even did it, of course, right? He might not have. And that presents this whole thing here where we're looking at how someone in this situation is treated by the police and how that is handled. Now, like I said at the start, this is a British TV show and it's British police. And I feel like there's a need to point that out because things are a little bit different than how US police are usually portrayed on TV. And generally speaking, how people think of the police acting is a little bit different in either side of the Atlantic. So worth keeping that in mind if you are, you know, basically just not from the UK and watching this. But it's, I think, like I said, the performances are good, right? I think the acting's quite good. They feel like really grounded characters, and I think that's the key to this, is that it's wanting to be methodical and it's wanting to go through the process and feel very realistic. Now, I'm sure people who actually work in the police or in the law or anything like that will probably spot flaws, but I think for most people this will probably feel very authentic the way it goes through the process. It feels very, like I say, methodical is the word I would use. But I think what I like about when filmmakers tie themselves to a strict kind of rule, or if you want to call it a gimmick, you can call it a gimmick. What I think works about that, though, is that it kind of forces them to not bullshit. And I think that's the real beauty of it, is that there's kind of just this natural realism that becomes, even if the details of what's happening are technically inaccurate, it feels all real because you're seeing it happening real time. And it just adds this air of authenticity that just is lacking otherwise. Because even though I'm sure there's many cheats going on, they're a lot harder to notice, and they feel like they're being very kind of forthcoming with everything in a sense. Plus, you've just got this kind of like flow to everything, because you can't just cut to a relevant shot. You have to have the camera move to the relevant thing. For example, just something from later in the episode when they're interviewing the suspect, and they put down a photograph of the person who was killed, and there's a very specific line where the camera goes down and looks at the face again after the question. And it's just, again, it's really emphasizing and making you think about the humanity of what's going on in the moment at the right time. And there's certain times where it'll choose to focus on one particular character's reaction. You know, maybe it's the dad's reaction during a certain scene where it'll just go up close to him and it'll stay in him. But because it free flows and then it like goes to someone else, you know, you feel like you're part of this dance the entire time. Like you're amidst everything that's going on. Like you're there and you're sitting in those rooms with the awkward silence, waiting to hear more information and the confusion of it all. Or you're even sometimes, because sometimes we follow the police and we go up to their office and we see them kind of just talking about what their next moves are and what they're doing. You know, these are not action movie like detectives by any means. They're very down to earth. This is the process. This is how we do it. It feels very almost administrative the way everything's tackled, which in this sense actually makes everything feel better. Like, I know that sounds arguably dull in a lot of ways. There's a time and place for everything, and I think the tone here that they're aiming for, they're hitting really well. The only actor that really stuck out to me that I recognize is the dad, Stephen Graham. I've seen in a bunch of things here or there. Weirdly, every time I see him, I always think the same thing, and that is that he looks like the English version of Donnie Wahlberg. maybe that's the most silly thing I've ever said, but I have that thought every time I see him. I think, oh, it's English Donnie Wahlberg, which is not to say anything. I'm not comparing his acting ability to Donnie Wahlberg. I think he's better than Donnie Wahlberg, if I'm honest. But but that's what I think every time I look at him. Yeah, so I kind of want to talk about just some specific things in the episode now. So I'll say spoiler warning, but I almost think that this is well, maybe it is, maybe you can be spoiled. I think you can, because you don't know exactly where it's going with each detail that it's bringing up. And a lot of this episode really feels like you're kind of hanging on the idea of, like, you know, whether or not this is like a false accusation or a real accusation. And is this all going to be about proving that he's innocent or whatever? Is it going to be a thing where the parents think he did it, don't think he did it, stand by him even if they do think he did it? Like, all these, like, permutations that it could be. You're kind of, your brain's racing through them all throughout the episode when, you know, I think by the end of this episode, there's a bit more of a clear path by the end, and that's kind of where it wraps up with. So I'll say spoilers now so I can talk about it, but I do recommend checking it out. I think it's an interesting show that kept me pretty captivated. Again, it's the filmmaking choice being the primary thing. The actors all feeling very natural is another big part, though. And just little things like the dad trying to keep him calm and saying things like eat your cornflakes or eat your cornies, they called it. Some middle of England slang was sneaking in here. So some phrases that I've never even heard before. The thing with British slang, though, in general, because it's so different all over the UK, is that it's very easy to just get it from context and you just sort of roll with it. So, you know, don't think for a second because I'm technically from the same island that I somehow understood or knew all the phrases that were being thrown around here. Okay? Sometimes it's easy to pick them up. Anyway, so spoilers, right? I made that clear. So, you know, like, I don't even know if I should, like, try and describe everything that happens in the episode, you know, in great detail, because I feel like that's kind of the beauty of watching it, is how much detail there is. But there's a lot of nice little things that they put in there as they're doing their shot. Just even at the start when they're going up to the house and, like, the SWAT team is getting ready to go inside, you see the van in the driveway and it's early morning, so you know everyone's at home. And it says, like, Miller's Plumbing. So it tells you, oh, the dad presumably is a plumber, right? That's probably, you know, where the name is. And sure enough, yeah, he is a plumber. The son, the accused, is Jamie Miller, and he's upstairs. Now, they're not waiting for this, and they are surprised this is happening, and they're just sort of saying, they're yelling things like, oh, you've made a mistake, you've got the wrong house, and, you know, occasionally complain about the door being busted in and all sorts. And Jamie wets himself when he gets out of bed, but it's all done kind of very procedural in a way that you can feel kind of like they're taking this very seriously. Like, the way they're coming into this house suggests that they think this is a big deal, and the family have no idea what's going on, and they think something's wrong. And even something as simple as, like, hey, follow us to the station, come where, you know, and we see the entire car ride to the station. One thing that it does do a couple times is that while it's in real time, it will sometimes, like, zone out of the audio, and you'll stop hearing the conversation, you'll just get music. It does that in the car after the initial, like, half of the conversation. But a lot of that is, like, you know, the detective reading, like, his rights, basically. Even giving him the advice of asking for a solicitor, which is just the UK word for lawyer, for anyone who's maybe confused by that. And just going through that like, kind of process, and just trying to make sure the kid understands what's going on and what his options are, and so on and so on. But all of it feels very kind of, like, again, methodical. It feels like we're going through the process, we're not leaving anything out. And the reason why that works, because it doesn't necessarily sound that exciting in and of itself, but the reason why that works is because what's actually great about the scene is you're reading the kid's reactions, and you're trying to gauge yourself, like, do you think he did something really bad? Does he look like a murderer? Does he look like some delinquent who's capable of that? Is he reacting in a way that suggests guilt? Is he reacting like an innocent, scared kid who's, like, mortified that this is happening to him? Is he you know, like just the pain of like waiting out this car ride, and you know, because we've all been there in a situation, not like this one, but we've all been in a situation where you're really, really dreading arriving somewhere because you know you're not going to enjoy what it is. Maybe it's something as simple as going to the dentist, or maybe it's something a bit more serious than that. But you're, you know, a funeral perhaps, where you're just kind of your stomach's in a knot, and you're kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop in some way, and there's like an impending dread of getting there. You feel that throughout the scene. You can feel it throughout a lot of the episode, to be honest. There's a lot of scenes with the kid, you know, when they get to the station and they take him inside, and they go up to the desk, and the desk sergeant has to ask him a bunch of questions, like, oh, what's your full name? Do you take any medication? Yada, yada. You know, just lots of things, standard things they clearly have to ask everyone. And you know, the kid's kind of trying to answer, and he's doing his best, but he's kind of zoning out, and not in like he's not paying attention, more like the fear and the emotion of everything's getting to him, and he's kind of struggling to keep a coherent like through line. But by the time he's off to the cell, we then follow the detective back, and we end up with the parents who have arrived with the daughter, and they're frustrated. They're waiting in this kind of little like room with a coffee machine, and again, this idea, much like the kid in the car, there's these like scenes of them having to wait. And I think one of the things that I really liked about this is that it's not until this scene where they clearly even start discussing, like, okay, what is this? Like, what's, you know, they're basically trying to convince themselves that this is clearly nonsense, right? He didn't do anything, and they're sort of saying that backwards and forwards. And when the inspector finally comes in and says, hey, he picked his dad as his appropriate adult, I think was the term, and the mum's like, why'd you pick him? Why'd you pick him? That doesn't make any sense. But you know, they're going through this, and like the solicitor eventually shows up as well, and that's a big part of like, okay, him giving the advice of, you know, say no comment, right? You can say your name, you can say basic facts, but say if they ask you anything about last night, say no comment. And even he doesn't know what the crime is exactly when he arrives. He kind of has to go and get briefed by the detective. And so like there's all these like parts to it, and it kind of forces you to wait. And I think one of the things that I really, really liked is, again, this idea of making you wait for certain scenarios that feel like really normal things to have in a family, but you have to wait a long time in this episode to get. And the example that I'm kind of talking about here is just the simple idea of when we finally get a chance, a scene with just the kid, just with Jamie and his dad with no one else around. And it happens very late in the episode. It's like right before like the interview, the big final scene at the end. But it felt like a big deal. Like when the solicitor said, hey, I'm going to pop out and go and like let them know we're ready or whatever. It hit me. It hit me that, oh wait, this is the first time that one of his parents has a chance without anyone else listening to actually just talk to him and ask him the question that they obviously want to ask. And even though they've been saying there's no way he's responsible for anything all episode, he has to ask it. He has to ask, did you do the thing they're saying you did? And he even says, look, if you know, even if you did, like, you know, we'll be here for you, but you have to like be honest and tell us, like, did you do this thing? And the kid says no. And he's been so scared throughout the whole episode, and we've went through all the awkward parts of like him getting his blood taken, and he has to get a strip search, which the dad almost gets into a fight with the officers about. And the kid has to like calm him down and tell him it's okay, because they have to look for any kind of, you know, wounds or anything that might relate to the crime. Yada. And the lawyer's quite clearly saying, yeah, this is kind of like, you can refuse, but it'll look really bad. It'll be bad for the defense if you refuse to do this. So what's really good about this scene, obviously, is they don't show, obviously, the kid being strip searched. They just focus in on the dad, because like everyone else in the room, there's like a nurse and the lawyer have both turned their back, so they're not watching. But the dad's kind of keeping his eye on everything. And one of the things that they put in my head, actually, earlier in the episode, is when the two police officers were talking to each other, one of them said, oh, did you get any weird feelings about the dad? And he goes, not really, why? And he basically just says that, oh, they had this case, like, you know, way years ago where the kid had done something, but it took us months to eventually uncover what the dad was doing to the kid, and how, you know, that was like a part of like the psyche of what the kid was up to. And And obviously, it came out of nowhere, and up until that point, nothing had suggested anything like that. But I couldn't help but feel in this scene when he was like really like we were staying on his face, looking kind of angry and sad as these policemen were searching his son. Part of me couldn't help but wonder: is there something? Are we going to go down that kind of path? But to be honest, nothing else after this made me feel that way either. So I don't think we are. But they put it in my head, so it's their fault that I even was thinking that there might be some other sinister thing at home. And we've got 3 more episodes to go through, so who knows what they're going to start throwing at me. Anyway, so all of this pacing is really good, right? The episode's just about an hour long, just over an hour. Although I think Netflix always have a lot of ads, or not ads, sorry, credits is the word I'm looking for. So, it's about an hour. It's about an hour, and it's paced really well, and it builds to this crescendo of getting to, like, okay, we finally have the real police interview, or the interrogation, to use the old word, although they don't actually call it that anymore, at least not in the UK. So, they sit down, and it's like, hey, what were you wearing last night? And he says no comment to a lot of these, blah, blah, blah. He's following the lawyer's requests and suggestions. But then they start asking about, like, are you into girls? And it's like, okay, where are they going with this? And they pull out some, like, Instagram posts where he, like, posted some model or something, and we never actually hear what he typed, right? But they suggest that the comments were not violent, that's maybe not the right word, but they suggest that it was more aggressive or again, maybe not hateful, but like definitely not loving. Don't get me wrong, it's probably nothing that a lot of teenage boys would say, but certainly there was like maybe a tone to the way he was talking about these attractive women that didn't sound good in the current context. And they ask him about this other girl that's in his school, and they put out this photograph, and then obviously immediately the audience, we're all like, yeah, okay, that's her. That's who's dead. And he says that. He's like, after they ask a couple of questions about her, he goes, oh, is she the one that's dead then? And the inspector kind of says, that would be really smart if you had done it, to ask that question. That would make you look quite innocent if you seem like you wouldn't know that already. So he's kind of poking the bear a little bit with that, but they get a little bit more intense with the showing things, and then eventually, like, hey, you were out last night, this is what you were wearing, and they start showing them like screenshots of like the CCTV stuff from around the area. So here's you walking here at this time, here's you walking here at that time, blah 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 blah, and then here's her walking here. You were following her. Here's you a minute later, same camera in the same direction. And then the episode ends with the gut punch of they just straight up have footage of the murder, right? They open a laptop, they play the footage, and at first I didn't think it was going to show the murder itself. I thought it was just going to show, them having a bit of a fight, like, so he saw her, leave it open-ended, because I genuinely thought at this point that we were going to be unsure whether or not he did it for the rest of the show. But to be honest, I mean, not that you get like a close look at the footage, we kind of like see it on a laptop from a little bit further back. So it's not like we can make out his face on the footage, but I'm assuming from the way they're talking, it's pretty clear it's him. But he clearly starts stabbing her, right? It's not, again, it's so small in the frame inside this laptop that it's not super bloody or anything. You're not like seeing a lot of gore or anything like that. But that almost makes it more eerie in a weird way. You just see the hand coming up and down as if he's stabbing her. And she gets stabbed 7 times, right? That's also what we find out here. And of course, like, as this is playing out, you see the dad's face, right? He's been sticking up for him. He's been encouraging him to defend himself with the questions and so on and so on. And after this, the kid's kind of breaking down now and crying. And the police, like, he points out that he had to tell the mum, like, the night before that, like, her daughter was dead and she was weeping in her kitchen at midnight and whatever else. And they end the interview. And the episode ends with the dad breaking down and crying, the son trying to like put his hand on his shoulder, and the dad like pulling away as if he's disgusted, but then kind of, says, what did you do? What did you do? And then kind of grabs him and hugs him, and they both cry, and that's when it cuts to black for the end of the episode. So, this episode's arc is really simple. It's kid is arrested, suspected of murder, and we go through the process. And with the family, that's the beauty of this, is that much like the family, we don't know if he did it, right? We don't know how bullshit this is, and we are kind of like maybe arguably almost on his side, because it does seem like he's shitting himself the entire time. Not necessarily because he's guilty, although in hindsight that kind of feels like that way, but just because he does seem genuinely scared. They even bring up, they try and humanize him in a number of ways. He's scared of needles. He's scared to get his blood taken. All these little things kind of build him up as just being a kid. But then you end with this, and just like the parents, like the dad specifically, you're hit with the gut punch. Oh, he definitely did this, and there is no arguing that he didn't. So I'm not sure what the rest of the 3 episodes are going to be. I presume the sentencing and the court trial or something is what we're going to be going through. I don't know how much of a skip, though. They might pick up quite quickly after this. I don't know. If anything, the only downside to this format is I suspect that because there is going to be a little bit of a jump in time, just in the sense that it's not going to pick up right where we left off, I assume we won't get the scene of the dad telling the mom and the sister that he did this. And I kind of want to see that scene. I kind of want to see the reaction of the other two when they find out what happened here. Because there's a lot of like perception things like throughout this as well. Like there's people out in the street watching as the kid's getting taken away in the van, that kind of thing. Just these little things where they're kind of maybe a little humiliated as well because of this. I mean, their main concern is just seeing that their son's okay, of course, but there's maybe a little bit of that sprinkled in just to add to everything. And then obviously the fact that it turns out to be true, and there's very, very quickly going to be, like, everyone's going to know. They're going to know who died, and they're going to know that he was arrested for it. It's going to be pretty obvious to anyone paying attention. So, this obviously is going to affect them, even beyond just their son probably going away for a very long time. They're probably going to have to move because they probably can't live around people who knew the victim, because it would just be too bad and complicated and weird. One of the things that I also liked in this episode is that a lot of characters throughout, when they're interviewing him, and this goes for both the inspectors, but also even the lawyer, the solicitor, is they keep pointing out that he's a good kid and that he's good grades in school. He's good. He gets A's, whatever. He's doing solid, and they point out that he's quite bright and that he's quite smart. And what's so interesting is that it feels like they're kind of trying to make him feel comfortable by like sort of keep giving him some praise and making the parents or making the dad feel comfortable that they're not just out to get him. Like, hey, like he's a good kid, he's smart, he's bright, whatever. But to be honest, like by the time we got to the end of the episode, it kind of felt like in hindsight that almost made it all worse, because now it's like, oh, you're telling me he's bright and that he's a good smart kid for his age. That means that the argument that he's just a kid who did something stupid is less and less like a something that you could believe, right? You're telling me that he's bright and he's smart. It means that any sort of hand waving you might be able to do by saying he's just a dumb child. Now, admittedly, at 13, you should know not to kill someone. I'm not saying that you should give someone a pass at 13, but it's almost like, no, but you especially are a bright 13-year-old. So you can't just argue you did something silly because you're a child and because you didn't understand what you were doing. You get all this. It almost felt like in hindsight that was all just setting us up for, like, oh, there's like, not that there's no remorse. He's clearly like not heartbroken, but he's breaking down, and maybe it's just because he's getting caught and because he's possibly getting in trouble for it, obviously, but how much guilt he feels about the crime itself, I don't know. I suspect the why he did it is something that's going to come up a lot. The implication in this interview is they think that he's attracted to her and that she wanted nothing to do with him, which, would be believable. It would make enough sense. But, I'm very curious to see what we're doing for the next 3 episodes, and if they're even like in the ballpark as compelling as this first one was, I'm probably in for a pretty good time. Just because, again, I think the way it chooses at certain points to focus on particular characters' faces, because, and I think it's almost a necessity to an extent as well, because if you're doing a single shot, you don't want to be doing something that feels like you're watching a game of tennis where you're constantly going back and forth like this, because it would actually be annoying to watch. So there's kind of like a pacing to it where you have to not always do that, and sometimes you have a two shot, sometimes you go in for a close up, sometimes you'll switch from one character to the next, but sometimes you'll just stay on one person for a while. And I think the choice to just stay on the dad's face and just kind of, because it's the sort of thing where it's like, okay, one, he's angry that they're doing this to his son, but there's also kind of this like slow realization of like they're taking this so seriously. What exactly do they think he did? And like maybe for the first time since he's had a chance to process any of this, he's thinking, did my son do this? Like they're taking this so seriously. Is there a chance he did it? And maybe motivates him asking the question. Although anyone would ask the question eventually, like, did you actually do it? So I'm very fascinated to see where we go with the next episode. But yeah, so no, it was good. And again, like I really felt the geography of the police station. That was another thing that I really liked. Is that the family were waiting in a room that to get to the hall you had to go through like a key card door. So we see police, various people punching in codes to get in and out, and even the lawyer doesn't have the code for that. He has to be like let in and out by an officer. And what I really liked about that is it gave this sense of this constant barrier between them and their son, and like the idea that every time we passed through that barrier, it felt like a threshold of some kind, and it just kind of made you really aware of how disconnected they felt in the scene, and even when you see him in the cell later, he obviously feels disconnected there because it's a cell. I don't know. There's just little things like that where it repeats enough throughout, where we're going through this door 4 or 5 times, and every single time someone has to sort of let someone in or out of it. It just starts to feel like just how much like, oh, now you're at the mercy of the system. Just or unjust as it is, this is what it is now. It's a process, rather than some big dramatic thing in a movie where you're like, chasing the bad guy to a ledge and like having a shootout. No, the process is kind of boring in this kind of very, and this is a weird compliment. It's actually the same thing I would compliment. There's an episode of the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer that does a very good job of capturing the boredom of death, right? And the boredom of the day or two that takes place after a death. I'm not going to say anything else because it would spoil some stuff, but I think this kind of does that for this process, is that it captures that boredom, but not in a way that you're bored by it, in a way that you get to feel all of the uncomfortable kind of waiting and silence, and it just sounds like you're in an office building when you're waiting to hear the fate of your loved one who might have done something awful. That's where I think the real feelings are coming from here, and the tension's coming from. So, very unique. I liked it a lot, and I'm excited to watch episode 2. So that is my feelings on Adolescence episode 1. If you've watched the show, by all means let me know what you thought of this first episode in the comments. Obviously keep spoilers away for the rest of the episodes, not just for me, but also for anyone else who's going to watch along and has just watched the first episode. So save full spoilers obviously for when I get to episode 4. But thank you for joining me. You can, of course, support everything over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and help keep all the reviews coming. You can also support via YouTube membership if that's more your thing. Support from anywhere is greatly appreciated. So thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?